While this is taking place, Brittney Griner comes out and says, I am so sick and tired of the NBA, WNBA. It used to be a peaceful, small little thing. Now there's crowds screaming, hollering. This is disruptive. It's not allowing us to play the game. This is her quote. I don't know if you saw this or not when she gave that.
Bet Patrick David just gave the worst reality check in the history of podcasts. Everyone was talking after Brittney Griner made some outrageous remarks about Caitlin Clark with racist overtones.
From 41. What the hell is going on with WNBA that they cannot handle all this attention that they're getting, as well as the hate and anger?
When Brittney Griner was out there complaining about crowd noise and making subtle racial remarks about Caitlin Clark, PBD was busy reminding her of some uncomfortable facts that she apparently forgot during her time away from basketball. Let's be completely honest about what happened on Patrick Bet David's podcast, because she just received the reality check of her life. Griner's utterly absurd remarks about how the WNBA used to be this quiet, peaceful place where you could bring your laptop and work during games kicked off the whole thing. Just think about that for a moment. A professional athlete complaining that fans are too boisterous and involved during sporting events? The audacity is astounding, but it gets much worse when you consider who is saying this.
I'd have fun with you. Brittney Griner. Where she says, right there, watch this. Every time we play her, there's this commotion, like this loud rumbling from the stands. Turns out it's people, thousands of them, just sitting there watching.
Griner reportedly lamented the unfair pressure to act as if they were there for entertainment, saying that WNBA games used to be peaceful and quiet, but now there are huge crowds of people watching from the stands, some of them shouting about what they're seeing. Here's a news flash. Brittney, you are there purely for entertainment, which is the main purpose of professional sports. However, the most upsetting aspect of her remarks was when she said she saw a father and daughter shouting in the crowd. She couldn't hear what they were saying exactly, but she assumed it was about her performance or some mild racism. Her choice of the term light racism to characterize basketball fans cheering during a game demonstrates exactly where her thoughts are on this entire issue, because they instantly turned to racial explanations for the crowd noise. Patrick bet when responding to these remarks, David didn't mince words, and to be honest, someone had to say what he said. People were reminded by PBD that Griner was indeed in a Russian prison not too long ago. She was imprisoned abroad on grave charges and had to be freed through a prisoner swap that included the release of a notorious arms dealer known as the Merchant of Death.
Used to be a chill, quiet place. You could bring your laptop and relax, maybe even get a little work done. But now, it's like there's large gatherings of people watching us from the stands. Some of them are yelling crazy shit about what they're seeing, putting unfair pressure on us to score, like we're there for their entertainment. You are! The whole thing is toxic. I saw a guy with his daughter in the crowd, both of them yelling, couldn't hear what they were saying exactly, but it was either my performance or some light racism. But
you would think that someone who is now free and living in America would not have many grievances, especially after being imprisoned in Russia. However, the prisoner exchange that brought Brittney Griner home involved trading Victor Bout, a man convicted of conspiring to kill Americans and aiding terrorists, whom the U.S. government released in order to bring Griner home.
Brittney Griner was in a Russian prison. You would think that somebody who is now free, back in America, on home soil, would not have too much to complain about. Especially something like this.
And she complains about the noise levels after being allowed to play the sport she loves again in front of eager spectators in the United States. You would assume that someone who had been imprisoned abroad would have a totally different view on freedom and opportunity, yet PBD's remark was cruel, but entirely correct. The fact that Griner finds crowd enthusiasm upsetting rather than motivating demonstrates how disconnected she has become from reality and thankfulness. The timing of these remarks is even more absurd because they were made at a time when the WNBA is—
It doesn't matter what sport you are. It doesn't matter what sport you pick. That's how fans act in every arena. In every arena. So, and then when you, clearly she's not remembering who they let out. to get her back.
The
on
merchant
American
of
soil.
death.
The merchant of death. An arms dealer that wanted to kill American citizens.
When Clark got hurt, ticket prices for the Fever Games fell right away. In Chicago, they went from $86 to $25, while in Washington, they dropped from $41 to $14. The ticket price statistics that PBD mentioned in the show tells the entire story about who is actually driving the WNBA success. When the primary draw fades, those aren't minor tweaks. Rather, they are market collapses. When you take into account that the majority of WNBA games were played in essentially empty arenas for the first 24 years of the league's existence, players were at ease with that because there was no pressure, no expectations, and no accountability to paying customers, making Gurrier's complaints about crowd noise even more ridiculous. All of that changed when Clark arrived, and it was obvious that several players weren't prepared for the transition. The WNBA lost money for 25 years in a row because of players who treated games more like casual pickup runs than like professional entertainment that people paid to watch. Gurrier's description of the old WNBA as a place where you could bring your laptop and get work done perfectly captures why the league was irrelevant for so long. PBD's response was especially successful because he prevented Griner from using victim narratives or racial grievances to divert attention from the situation. She was freed from international detention and is now able to play basketball in America for more money than the WNBA has ever made. Her response was to complain about the lack of fan enthusiasm, which was particularly detrimental to Griner's case. PBD emphasized that players in the NBA, NFL, MLB, and NHL all deal with hostile road situations and fervent fans. This is not an uncommon burden that calls for special accommodations, but rather a necessary part of their jobs. It appears that Gurrier believes WNBA athletes should have all the perks of professional sports, including compensation, the stage, and exposure without the demands or pressures of entertaining paying fans. That isn't how professional sports operate in any league or nation. The Russian jail element that PBD raised was especially harsh, since it demonstrated how tone-deaf Griner is using her platform to whine about Americans being passionate about basketball games. Patrick. She is someone who has actually experienced tyranny, constraints on her freedom, and consequences for her conduct. Bet the Michael Jordan comparison was especially pertinent because Jordan experienced similar resentment from other players who felt he was receiving too much attention and credit. David also addressed the broader resentment that some WNBA players feel toward Clark's success. He acknowledged that it's understandable for players to feel frustrated when they see someone getting attention that they feel they deserve, but he also pointed out that this dynamic exists in every sport when transcendent talents emerge. The Detroit Pistons actually made the Jordan rules in an attempt to physically and psychologically abuse him, but the reason for this animosity was not the media's exaggerated portrayal of his significance, but rather Jordan's indisputable influence.
WNBA says they want to get paid more. They're saying this year they're going to make $1 billion. That's what they're saying, okay? For the first time ever. Now that Caitlin Clark is hurt for 2 weeks, did you see ticket prices? Insane. Let me read you the ticket prices. After Caitlin Clark's been hurt for 2 weeks. All right? So let's go through this. Caitlin Clark absence is having an immediate impact beyond the court. According to data shared by Yahoo Sports via TickPick, prices for two specific Indiana Fever away games against the Chicago Sky and the Washington Mystics dropped sharply after Clark was sidelined. Before the injury, the lowest ticket available for Fever's matchup in Chicago was $86. For the game in Washington, fans needed at least $41 to get in. After the news of Clark's absence, those get-in prices fell to $25 from $86 and $14.
Clark and 1063 The circumstances are comparable. The focus she gets is determined by her quantifiable influence. Television ratings and ticket sales. Revenue from merchandise participation on social media. These are objective financial indicators that demonstrate her worth to the league, not arbitrary views or media narratives. Gurrier's complaints regarding racial overtones and crowd reactions are especially troubling because they presume the worst from basketball fans who are just passionate about the sport. The idea that father-daughter pairs cheering at games must be practicing racism demonstrates a worldview that seeks out issues rather than seizing opportunities. The podcast conversation exposed how unprepared some WNBA players were for mainstream success. For 25 years, they lived in a bubble with no criticism, little expectations, and almost no accountability. With Clark's arrival, there was increased scrutiny, pressure, and performance-related repercussions. Because it emphasized the sharp contrast between Gurrier's time in a Russian prison and her current grievances against American basketball fans, PBD's remark about appreciation was particularly potent. The WNBA's financial projections depend entirely on sustaining the level of fan interest that Clark has generated. If players like Griner are successful in alienating casual fans with complaints about enthusiasm and accusations of racism, the league will swiftly return to its previous model of empty arenas and financial losses. Someone who truly understood what she went through should be celebrating every moment of freedom, every opportunity to compete, and every fan who chooses to spend money watching her play. Gurrier's remarks were especially regrettable because they were made at a time when the WNBA was seeing its greatest financial results in league history. Rather than seizing the chance and building on the momentum, she chose to concentrate on alleged issues rather than clear advantages. Patrick Bet. David had the ideal viewpoint to handle these problems because of his experience in business. He is aware that income, which covers player salaries, is fueled by fan interaction and customer happiness. A basic ignorance of how professional sports economics operate is revealed by complaining about customers being overly excited, which is similar to whining about having too much money. The parallel to other entertainment sectors was especially pertinent. Actors don't gripe about audiences being too attentive during performances, and musicians don't gripe about crowds being too rowdy during concerts. Creating excitement and emotional investment from paying clients is the main goal of professional entertainment. Gurrier's perspective appears to be that WNBA players ought to enjoy all the advantages of greater fame without having to deal with the criticism or pressure that accompanies widespread attention, which is unrealistic in any professional sport or entertainment sector. The racial dynamics that Gurrier raised are especially delicate because they